Okay, so today we're going to do a deep dive into something pretty crucial and I think particularly relevant for those of you prepping for the UPSC exams.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole India-China relationship,
Mm-hmm.
under Xi Jinping,
Right. Yeah.
and particularly how it's been evolving,
Mm-hmm.
especially given that it's a topic that seems to come up all the time in the UPSC mains current affairs.
Oh, for sure.
And it could even pop up in prelims, too, so
Yep.
no escaping it, really.
Nope.
We've been going through this really interesting article from The Hindu
Oh, yeah. I read that one.
to try and pull out the most important stuff for you guys.
Absolutely. The key takeaways.
So yeah, hopefully this deep dive will give you a clearer picture of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe we can start with you giving us a bit of an overview. Like, what's the central theme we're looking at today?
I think the big thing is that there's been a pretty noticeable shift in how China's approaching this relationship compared to, say, like the Deng Xiaoping era or even Hu Jintao.
Right, a bit more assertive.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. A lot more assertive. And to really get why that's happening, we need to look at the background a bit. China's imperial history, especially what they inherited from the Qing dynasty, and how that feeds into this narrative of historical victimhood they often project on the world stage.
Okay, so that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Especially for those of you gearing up for the UPSC exams. This stuff is really fundamental. It has implications for pretty much everything. India's foreign policy, how we approach border security, and the whole power dynamic in our region.
Yeah, for sure.
Whether you're writing mains answers about international relations or tackling prelims questions on current events, you really need to have a grip on this.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's dive into this shift in China's posture.
Mm.
What are we seeing that's so different from how things were a few decades ago?
I'd say the biggest change is that they've moved away from Deng Xiaoping's whole focus on economic growth and Hu Jintao's kind of cautious foreign policy.
Yeah.
Under Xi Jinping, it's been a lot more about projecting power, being proactive and assertive, both in the region and globally.
Right, making their presence felt.
Exactly. And a lot of this assertiveness seems to be tied to this surge in nationalist sentiment and this constant harking back to China's past greatness. Think about the Qing dynasty. They control this huge territory. And the current government, they often use this historical reach to basically legitimize the territorial claims they're making today, whether it's in the South China Sea or along the border with India.
It's interesting because it's one thing to talk the talk, but then there are the actual actions on the ground. The article highlights several times when things have gotten heated at the border in the Himalayas during Xi Jinping's time.
Yes.
You walk us through some of those and explain what might be going on strategically.
Sure. So we've seen a pattern of incidents, Depsang in 2013, then Demchok in 2016, then Doklam in 2017, and of course the clash in the Galwan Valley in 2020. Now, China usually presents these as defensive moves or responses to what they claim are Indian incursions. But when you look at how often these things are happening and the way they play out, it suggests there's something bigger going on strategically. For instance, the Depsang incursion that happened on this plateau, that's super important strategically near the Karakoram Pass.
Right.
It seems like they might have been testing India's reaction, seeing where the vulnerabilities are in this really key area.
Bit of a probing action.
Exactly. And then you have Doklam, which was all about changing the status quo in this tri-junction area that's vital for India's security in the Northeast.
Right, I see.
So even though they frame it as being defensive, these actions seem designed to gradually shift the line of actual control more and more in China's favor.
So it's like, even though there are diplomatic talks and both sides say they want peace, what's happening on the ground suggests a different objective, maybe a push for more regional control or even dominance.
That's a really important point to keep in mind. Diplomatic engagement is important. Keeping those communication channels open is crucial.
Yep.
But India has to be careful. Like the article says, just because things seem to calm down for a bit doesn't mean there's been a fundamental shift in China's long-term goals.
Yeah, it could just be a pause.
Exactly. It could be a tactical pause while they consolidate what they've gained or deal with other priorities.
Right, okay. That brings us to those signs of de-escalation we saw recently, especially towards the end of 2024. The announcements made just before the BRICS summit in Kazan about the border patrolling mechanisms.
Right.
What are your thoughts on those? Do you think they signal a real change, or are they more for show?
Well, the timing's really interesting, isn't it? Right before a big international event like the BRICS summit.
Yeah.
And the fact that they didn't give a lot of specifics.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
It definitely suggests both sides want to project this image of stability, maybe even make it look like they're making progress on managing those long-standing border issues.
But they were pretty vague, weren't they? No concrete details on how these mechanisms would actually work or how they'd address the main points of disagreement?
Absolutely. And the fact that the military standoff is still going on in several key areas along the LAC, along with the lack of clear plans for implementing these patrolling mechanisms, it does raise some serious questions about how genuine this so-called thaw really is.
Right. It makes you wonder.
And then you have the optimistic statements from the leaders, China talking about harmonious dance and Prime Minister Modi saying things are back to normal.
Right.
These are important diplomatically, of course, but they don't necessarily translate into actual changes on the ground where the troops are.
So essentially, we shouldn't assume that just because the language is more diplomatic, the issues are actually being resolved.
Right.
These gestures could be more about managing public perception or buying time for other strategic objectives rather than actually resolving the fundamental disagreements and scaling back the military buildup.
Exactly. And if you connect this to China's broader strategic goals in the region, these symbolic gestures might be a way to create some breathing room so they can focus on other things like economic development or projecting themselves as the regional leader
I see.
without actually changing their long-term ambitions when it comes to territory or strategy.
Okay, so for India, that raises a big question. How do you interpret these mixed signals and figure out the right policy response?
It's a tough one for sure.
Which leads us to the challenges India is facing in this relationship. The article points out a few key things, starting with this strategic imbalance, especially when it comes to military power and technology.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And I think this is a really important starting point for understanding the power dynamics at play.
Absolutely. If you just look at the difference in defense spending, it's pretty stark. China's boosting its defense budget by 7.2% for 2025, which is a lot, especially when you consider that India's defense spending is still under 2% of its GDP. That difference in resources lets the People's Liberation Army maintain a really significant and increasingly modern military presence in those contested areas like Ladakh. And they're equipped with some seriously advanced weaponry. Plus, there are reports that China's expanding its nuclear arsenal, which adds a whole other layer of complexity to the strategic calculations India has to make.
So it's not just about the sheer numbers of troops and weapons. The article also emphasizes how quickly China's advancing in areas like artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies. How much do these technological gaps matter in shaping the future of the relationship? Like, what kind of real-world impact could we see in a military scenario?
I mean, these technological advantages are a potential game changer. China is leading the way in AI, cyber warfare, quantum technology, and that could give them a big edge in future military operations. Think about it in a military context. AI could be used to boost surveillance so you can monitor borders more quickly and comprehensively. It could also speed up decision-making in warfare, which would give the side with better AI a huge advantage in situations that are changing rapidly.
Right, because things can escalate so quickly.
Exactly. And then there's even the possibility of autonomous weapon systems controlled by AI.
Yeah.
This is all stuff that could seriously challenge India's strategic autonomy and its ability to deter or respond to aggression if it happens. India is working on its digital military transformation, but it seems to be moving at a slower pace, which means this technological gap could widen, and that has serious strategic implications.
Right. It's a bit of a race.
It is.
And it's not just about direct military confrontation either. China's growing influence, right, in India's neighborhood is another challenge. The article specifically mentions what's happening with Bangladesh's foreign policy. Can you expand on that a bit and how it reflects this broader trend?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is China steadily expanding its influence in South Asia in a subtle but pretty effective way. And Bangladesh is a good example. It's a country that's historically been seen as being in India's sphere of influence because of our shared history and culture.
Right.
But things are shifting. China's really stepped up its diplomatic engagement with Bangladesh. They're investing heavily in infrastructure projects, and trade ties are deepening.
I see.
So this creates a new dynamic of strategic competition in a region that's crucial for India's security and connectivity. It basically highlights China's strategy of using economic engagement to build political clout in the countries around India.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly.
And this isn't limited to South Asia, is it? The article also talks about China's growing influence in Africa, particularly its interest in securing resources like nuclear energy materials.
Right. They're not just focused on one region. They're very active in Africa, and they're specifically trying to lock down access to those nuclear energy resources.
So they're thinking long-term.
Oh, absolutely. This is about a broader global strategic vision. While India's involvement in Africa is much more low-key, China got in early, and they've been assertive about securing those vital resources. And that could give them some serious long-term geopolitical and economic advantages as the global competition for those resources heats up.
Okay, so taking all of this into account, China's more assertive stance, the uncertainty about de-escalation, the military and technological disparities, and their expanding influence, both regionally and globally, what does the article suggest India should do going forward?
It emphasizes a few key things. First, India needs to be ready for unexpected shifts in the global landscape. Like, what if U.S.-China relations start to improve? That could really change the geopolitical game and potentially put India in a tougher spot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So India's foreign policy has to be adaptable, and they need to be thinking ahead.
Right, anticipating different scenarios. So given all these uncertainties and potential changes, the article argues for a specific approach to foreign policy, right? A more pragmatic, maybe even realist approach. What would that look like in practice?
Exactly. It basically says India needs to adopt a realpolitik approach. The world's changing, multilateralism is weakening, the rules-based international order is declining. So India needs to prioritize its own core national interests and security above everything else.
Makes sense.
And that means doing a few key things. It means significantly boosting their own military capabilities to address those imbalances with China. It means actively working to make sure its neighbors aren't being pulled into someone else's sphere of influence. And it means getting strategic about diversifying its partnerships, looking beyond traditional allies to build resilience and have more leverage when dealing with China.
Okay, so to sum up this deep dive for all you UPSC aspirants out there, we've seen a definite shift in China's approach under Xi Jinping. It's become more assertive, and they're drawing on their historical narrative to support their actions.
Yeah.
Now, there have been some signs that tensions might be easing,
Right.
but it's not clear how genuine that de-escalation is. The military buildup continues, and those fundamental issues haven't been resolved.
Right.
So India is facing some serious multifaceted challenges in this relationship. We've got those strategic imbalances in military power and technology, and we've got China's expanding influence both in our neighborhood and further afield. The way forward, according to the Hindu, is to take a pragmatic, realpolitik-based approach. Focus on building up India's own strengths, securing the region, and diversifying those strategic alliances.
That's a good summary. It's really important for UPSC aspirants to understand how complex this is. The India-China relationship goes way beyond just border disputes. It involves strategic, economic, and technological dimensions that are constantly evolving, and they have huge implications for India's future role in the world.
Definitely. So on that note, here's something for you to think about as you continue your UPSC preparations. How can India best balance that long history of engagement and cultural connection with China with the realities of modern power competition? How do we safeguard our strategic autonomy in a world that's becoming more and more uncertain?
Yeah, that's the big question.
It's a tough one with no easy answers, but it's a question that's going to shape India's strategic path in the years to come.
Absolutely. It's crucial to think deeply about how historical narratives, rapid technological advancements, and those shifting global alliances all play into the India-China relationship. It'll give you a much better understanding of international relations, which is super important for your UPSC exams.
So if you found this deep dive helpful for your UPSC prep, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below with any questions you have.
Yeah, we love hearing from you.
We're always trying to make this content as relevant and insightful as possible for you guys. And just a reminder, our discussion today was based on that great article from The Hindu.
It's a good one.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.